Thank you for joining us on today's session, Make Data Better Together with Talend and Snowflake. Our agenda for today is to talk about some of the modern data challenges that many of you are encountering. We'll then look at the requirements for collaborative data management and then the Talend platform to address those requirements. We'll give you a demonstration of those and summarize with some key takeaways. I'm Michael Destine, Director of Technology Alliances at Talend, and joining me today is Cameron Davey, Solution Architect, also at Talend. For those of you that aren't familiar with Talend, we're recognized as a leader by top analyst firms such as Gartner and Forrester. Recently, Forrester issued a report called the Data Fabric Wave and marked us as a leader in that report. It's through that leadership that we're trusted by over more than 4,000 organizations globally. Companies such as Citigroup, Bayer, L'Oreal, Toyota, and Domino's all rely on Talend for their data integration, data management needs. Much of that is due to our partnerships with leading cloud ecosystem vendors such as AWS and Microsoft, as well as Snowflake, who is the subject of today's session. We have offices all over the world in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, and we support many different cloud regions. What we're hearing from our customers is that through the years, as they built up different siloed systems, whether those be on-prem legacy systems, on-prem ERP applications or other applications, or SaaS-based applications and systems, but they want to turn all that data, that siloed data, into one single source of trust. And they want to do that so that they can liberate the data usage among all of their business users and truly become a data-driven organization. To do that, there are some key requirements for a successful data platform. The first and foremost is a collaborative capability to accelerate the exchange and trust of information that's being exchanged. To get there, they need to have automation and artificial intelligence that's going to accelerate that data consumption. In order to consume it, they're going to have software tools that are born in the cloud, native cloud tools that are going to ease deployment, scalability, and end user access. The ease of use of those tools needs to be there so they can onboard non-technical experts, because those people want to do self-service. They want to let the business users prepare and manage the data. So of course, all of that needs to have control and governance so that you can orchestrate the data flow as well as the stakeholder responsibilities around managing that flow. To address these requirements, Talend provides multiple tools. But we do that through an environment where data becomes a team sport. Let me explain. In an example, we have a data scientist that's developed a model that's going to use weather data to predict better outcomes for the organization. But that model needs to be shared with the data curator who's going to verify it for quality and compliance, and is going to need to involve the business users. Once that's been approved, they need to make that operationalized. To do that, they're going to need help from an IT developer and an engineer to make an automate and a real-time data integration process. Once that's done, the business analyst can then start preparing the data and sharing it for downstream business users who are going to consume it in reports, business intelligence, or other business processes. Together, they need to be able to collect, transform, govern, and share that information. To do that, Talend provides role-specific tools that are appropriate for each person on that data team, whether it's a data steward, a business analyst, a data scientist, IT developer, or business user. Let's talk about how we do that for Snowflake in particular. Right? At the core, trust in your data is paramount. And Snowflake provides a fantastic environment to be able to store and manage your cloud data in a complete platform for many different workloads. But at the end of the day, the content is what really matters. And being able to trust that content is paramount for the business users. Talend provides a trust score that uses several different factors to create a numerical value to let the users understand how well can they trust the information in a particular data set. It's going to look at the quality of the data based on technical factors such as is it formed correctly? Does it meet certain needs? They're going to look at user ratings. How well do the users like, how much do the users like the information that they're getting? It's going to look at regulation compliance. Is it going to the right places and used by the right people? And then there's always the popularity and the usage of the data. If more people are using it, there's probably higher trust value in that. Let's talk about how we get to that trust score. To do that, we provide Talend data inventory. And this is going to really capture all of that data intelligence and provide that trust environment. Think of this as your single point of single console to have access to all of the data intelligence, but it is an automated environment that's going to create that score across different data pipelines and different data sets. What this will do is it's going to cut the time for the users to find the data, to understand what data is there, and thus cut the time to consume the data that they need. And all of this is based on a cloud native environment in Talend Cloud. Now that trust score is combined of multiple factors, as I mentioned before. And here you're seeing how those factors play into the trust score itself. On the far left, you see the different data sets that are used in the Snowflake database. And then the second column is really that trust score. So the summary of how well can you trust that information. As we said, that comes from multiple factors. User ratings is the first one that you see in column 3. But then you see the data quality ratings. And so this is really utilizing the data profiling tools to help understand what is the quality of the content in those tables. And as you might notice, there's 3 different colors there: green, gray, and orange. The green means it's good, the gray means it's missing, and the orange means that it doesn't comply. We'll talk a little bit more about how to fix that in a moment if it's not complying. You see, if you might be able to want to share that information with other users, and so that's going to help you understand, whether or not that information is trusted by downstream consumers. Users can provide an endorsement and also provide a favorite. And lastly, they provide, there's an owner. Who owns that data? Who's the person responsible for that data set? So that if you do have questions about it, there's someone you can go to ask questions. Now, I mentioned earlier about that quality and how to improve the quality. So in the one that's highlighted, you see a very small set of orange. So that maybe the trust on that is pretty high. But there's other ones where you see some larger orange bars. And in those data sets, when you want to improve the trust in that data, you click on the next level here, which is the Talend data preparation. So this is, again, it's a web-based environment. It uses a spreadsheet metaphor to allow the users to visualize the data that's in those data sets, see where there might be problems, join columns together, split columns apart to prepare the data and make it more appropriate for usage. But most importantly, they can apply data quality functions to the data. And so they can right-click and add different functions to the data, and that's going to improve the quality of information. As they go through multiple steps, they're creating a recipe, if you will, of how that data is corrected. And so what that recipe is, that's the business definition of what quality is. But that's also a technical artifact for the IT team to be able to apply to a data flow. And so the data preparation tools allow for great business and IT collaboration and teamwork across the operations. So you go from an ad hoc data preparation to a fully managed data integration process. Now, how you do that is use that recipe that I mentioned. You send that recipe to the data integration specialist, who's going to use a different UI called the pipeline designer. And the pipeline designer, it describes the flow of information from the source to the targets and applies either the recipe that was defined in the data preparation tool or a set of other functions to be able to transform the data or improve the quality. So you might need to filter the data, you might need to join the data, you might need to split it across different tables, and so forth. And so through this pipeline designer, you can connect to the data, transform it, apply the data quality, and then deliver it to a downstream environment. All that's done through an operational environment that you can schedule or trigger at different moments. And that way you can ensure that the data is flowing from the sources to the end user consumers in the appropriate manner. Cameron, why don't you give us a demonstration of that now?
All right, so let's take a look at the demo that we're going to show you today. So let's introduce our company. So we have a business challenge in front of this company, in front of Acme Retail. They have low performing marketing campaigns, they've missed revenue opportunities, and they urgently need to make actionable customer data 360-degree view of that data. So we've got our marketing ops and our data engineering team. And from the marketing operations perspective, they have the objectives here to be able that they need to improve marketing effectiveness, turn that data into revenue, and to protect sensitive data as well. From the data engineering standpoint, we need to be able to help connect and cleanse that data to make it more trustworthy, to modernize the infrastructure, and to operationalize the data flows that are coming in. So the current pains that our Acme retail company are currently going through is that they have low impact marketing as a result of their campaigns, weak data monetization, and unnecessary data is being exposed. So these are definitely challenges within an organization that need to be resolved. From the data engineering perspective, well, this is always the case that if bad data is coming in, bad data is going to come out unless you're going through that process to be able to connect and clean that data effectively. They're dealing with a combination of legacy and modern platforms, and they need to be able to delegate the cleansing and the protection in order to free up resources for those data engineers. So the first thing that we're going to see is that we're going to capture the data intelligence within our systems. We're going to start in Pipeline Designer within the dataset view. And Pipeline Designer is great as it's showing the modern ways to connect and collect disparate data sources in an easy way. So the data engineer is going to come in and he's going to want to see cloud native tools, things that he is more familiar with. Now I need to reconcile that data from our legacy standpoint. So we've already configured those two data sets. These are coming in from the legacy CRM system. And now we've got Snowflake housing our Shopify data as well. So now we've got data inventory here where the broader team, not just the data engineer, but the broader team is going to be able to interact with that data to see how that data looks, to see if it is trustworthy, to see which data and which data sets they want to connect in with their pipelines, and which data is going to best address the business problems that they are experiencing. And then finally, the operational folks, the marketing ops, et cetera, have an understanding of how they want that data to look. So we want to make sure that rather than relying on the data engineer solely to change that data, we want to empower and enable the operations teams who are close to the data, who are going to be the people that are consuming that data, give them an interface, in this case through Talend data preparation, give them an interface where they can interact with shaping that data, cleansing that data, providing better quality to that data, and that process can then be looped in to the overall workflow of the data itself. And then ultimately, once that data is ready to go, then you have the ability to connect in with your various BI interfaces, or that data can be funneled back into other applications such as Marketo, et cetera, or that data can be flowed right back into Snowflake for further analysis through things like Power BI and other analytics environments. So let's go take a look at that demo now. Here I am within Talend Cloud, and the start of our demonstration today is to establish the connections that we're going to use to our two primary data sources, our legacy CRM data and our Shopify data. So I do that by going into Data Inventory. So data inventory catalogs the connections that we have available for us. So first is my REST API connection into our legacy CRM data that we have available. And then the second is our connection into our Snowflake data warehouse, which we've established here. Very simple. It's just a connection using my connection parameters, and I have that ready to go. The next thing to do is to establish the data set. In other words, the data that I am planning to connect to within that particular data warehouse. So in our case, again, we want to come into our CD Shopify Snowflake example here. I can click on that, and that establishes the connection that I'm going to bring in. So I'm connecting into the Shopify customers table within my Snowflake data warehouse. And this is our first look within data inventory. Now we'll come into data inventory a little bit later to show you exactly what this is all about. But primarily what we want to focus on up here is the trust score and the quality of that data. So that trust score helps you to answer the question, how trustable, if that's the right word, how trustable is my data set? So this global quality indicator aggregates several metrics into a single and easy to understand score that scales from 0 to 5. So several factors, though, can raise or lower that trust score of a data set. And the main ones are the quality of the data itself, which you can see visualized down below. So that's including all the valid values, the invalid values, and empty values that you've got. the presence of user ratings. You can see that this is a new connection and nobody's used it, so there's no user ratings, and the certification level. So has this been certified yet? And that trust score here is updated every time an action impacting those parameters is performed. So now that we've established our connections and our data set, so we have our data set ready for our Shopify out of Snowflake, and we've got our legacy CRM REST API connection, now we're ready to go into Talend Pipeline Designer to build a pipeline. So it's now time to consolidate our Shopify data with our legacy CRM data. So to achieve this, we are going to create a pipeline using Talend Pipeline Designer. So I'm going to come back over to our main view, and I'm going to go ahead and launch Pipeline Designer. And within here, first step is that we're going to add a pipeline. So I come up to add a pipeline, and that's going to create a canvas, if you will, for creating our new pipeline. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Source, and I'm going to scroll down until I find my CD Shopify Snowflake, which is the data set that we added just earlier. So I've now added that on to my view. And if we look down below, we can see, and I can switch over to the table view, you can see a live preview of that data as it exists within the data warehouse. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a processor, which is like a function or action on the data itself. So I'm going to pick split, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the full name parts from the data warehouse. And so I've configured that accordingly. I'm extracting the full name parts, I'm selecting which fields, and I just need to select which field it is that I'm going to process, and that is the full name field here. So I'll go ahead and save that, and I've now configured that processor accordingly. I'm going to add another processor into here, my strings function. So I'll grab my strings function out of here, and I am going to go ahead and change to uppercase. And the fields that I'm going to process now, you'll notice down below, is that it is actually split again because of the previous processor or function. It has split the full name field into its various subsections. So I'm going to select the last name portion of that and go ahead and click save, and that's ready to go there. And now I'm going to join in my CRM data to my Shopify data. So I'm going to go ahead and click the join processor here, which is available now, and I'm going to join that data set together. So I've added in our CRM data here. It's a left outer join, and this is explaining the conditions of that join. So I'm basically joining on last name to be able to merge those data sets together, join those data sets together. So I've now saved that successfully as well. Now I have some specific reusable code from Python that I want to add in as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to add in a Python processor to this, and that's going to allow me to add in some additional code if I want to. And within this Python processor or element, I have added in the code that I want to be able to process as part of this pipeline. So I've added that in. It is a map type processor, so we've added that and saved that code directly there. So with that saved, I want to move along and add to our pipeline. I'm going to add in a data cleansing element to this. So again, to further enhance and improve the quality of the data that is being processed through this pipeline. So here's my data cleansing processor that I'm going to add in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill empty cells with text. The fields that I'm going to process is going to be the acquisition field, and the value for that I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it with the value organic. So if it is blank or empty, it's going to fill it with the value for organic and save that. And the last step is to determine the destination. So I've built this entire pipeline. I have to land that data somewhere, right? We're doing all of this great processing on this. We need to put that data somewhere. So we're going to add a data set on the fly with the Snowflake connection that we previously created. So I'm going to come in here and add that destination and add that in. So in here, we're going to create a new data set out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and call this my CD Snowflake Output. There we go. And for the connection, we're going to use the existing Snowflake connection that we established earlier. And this is going to insert a new table. So what we're going to do is it's going to try to load the existing tables that we have in there. That's great, but we don't want to add it to an existing table. We want to create a new table. So I'm going to go ahead and call this, okay, so I've called that CD Shopify out, and I'm going to go ahead and validate that. So we've created a new data set, if you will, a new landing spot for that. Now, what we need to make sure is we need to make sure that we create the table if not exists. This table does not exist yet. We're creating it brand new. So we've created that output now. So I've selected everything. I've got everything queued up. I've selected where I want this to run. And now I can go ahead and just hit run to go. And you can see now that that was successfully run. That that pipeline ran in 43 seconds. It processed a number of records, and that data was immediately included into the Snowflake output. So if we go over to our Snowflake interface, we'll be able to see that data. So if I come over here, I can see that there is my new CD Shopify out records that we've got. And if I go ahead and I preview that data, it will preview the data that we had within there. And remember that what we added in to the acquisition column was if there was blank, there was organic. So you can see that there is now a number of values that are listed as organic now. So now that we've created our first data set, let's go back to the data inventory app and let's open up this example. So here, if I come back to my data set, I have my new CD Snowflake output. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up my CD Snowflake output. And from here, it's now telling me automatically, because it's able to read that information, some very valuable info and insight around this data set automatically. The first thing is that it's going to give me this read of my data quality based on invalid values, empty values, valid values. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the demo. And of course, it's already established that trust score that we talked about earlier. Now, there's some other insights that we can gain or some other activities that we can take on this data set within data inventory. To make these data sets accessible to other members of your organization, you can use the sharing feature right up at the top. Users also have the possibility to be able to rate the quality of those data sets that they own or that are shared with them. So I can give that a rating. You can see it's brand new, so there's no ratings within here. And then finally, data sets can be certified by users who have been given access to those data sets. Now, certifying data sets is a specific permission within Talend and within the Talend Management Console. So you have to have the necessary rights to be able to do that. But certified data sets are those that have been reviewed and are considered to hold reliable or trusted data. And then furthermore, if you want to favorite this, you can add that to your favorite data sets as well. Now, we've established this data set. We can see that within data inventory. So let's create a new data preparation from this data set by clicking the Talend data preparation icon up here in the top right. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new preparation. And that brings me directly into Talend data preparation, where I can begin to prepare this data. So the first thing that we're going to do within our data set is to remove any of the duplicate rows or records that we may have seen in there. So if I come over to my right-hand panel, I can come over to my table, click on table to see the table functions. And what I want to do is I want to remove any duplicate rows that are available. Now, as soon as I click on that function or that activity, it opens up on the left-hand side my recipe, if you will. So within data preparation, it's important to understand that I am creating the instructions for how this data will eventually be changed. Right now, I'm not changing the data. I'm just setting up the instructions. So the reason for this is that it is very typically a data analyst or a business analyst who is using data preparation, who knows what the data needs to look like from a business outcomes perspective, but they may not necessarily be the data engineer who's responsible for manipulating the data itself. But the data analyst or the business analyst, that's the hat I'm wearing right now, says we need to remove the duplicate rows because I don't want that in my resultant data set. So that's what I'm doing now. And then I'm going to continue to build in more steps into this recipe until I'm happy that it's completed. So the next step would be to come over to the country column over here and come over and select column because I want to affect the column itself. And I want to be able to change some values. So I want to convert country names and codes. So I'm going to convert these from ISO 3 to ISO 2, and I'm going to remove the create new column. I want this to affect the existing column, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. So we now have those two steps into our recipe. Now I want to be able to standardize the remaining country codes by using fuzzy matching. So again, I'm going to come into the country code and I'm going to use standardized value fuzzy matching. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to make sure I have a number of different options for this. So I'm going to say I want to use the closest match possible for that and go ahead and submit. So you'll notice that when I have made these changes here, that you can see that this colored bar at the top changes, and that is to indicate visually what the shape and the style of this data is. Anything that's green is good. It is valid data that conforms to the data type that is established for this particular column. Anything that is in dark gray here, those are empty values. And anything that is highlighted in orange, those are invalid values. So we're going to, part of this process is to use that visual information to fix the data as it's coming through. One area where we want to fix that specifically is on this acquisition text here, this acquisition value. So if I come in here, for instance, now some of it has been filled out already, but we have already established that there is in fact an existing semantic type that we created within data inventory, and we called it acquisition channel. So we can switch this now to acquisition channel type so that it tells us exactly what is available. And you can see that there is some information that's in there that tells us that we want to be able to fix that. So what I did very quickly was to use that standardized values feature again to highlight exactly how those values might change. Now we don't need the phone number value in here, so I can go ahead and I can click the phone number information, and what we actually want to do is mask that information. So I can come in and do a search as well. There are a whole host of different functions and capabilities that are within there. If we know the name, we can actually just do a search. So I'm going to pick mask data, and I'm just going to go ahead and select that we want a random masking mode and submit that. So it just randomly masks the values that are within that phone number column for us. And furthermore, we can come up and click on the quality bar, and we can, of that particular column, and say that we want to delete the rows with invalid cell values. So we're getting our data set nice and crisp and clean now for sure. The last step that we're going to implement here is on the address field, and we're going to use the magic fill capability within Talend, Talend data preparation to be able to use this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove create new column, and I'm going to go ahead and suggest some of the values that we see within here. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to type in what the input is. So in other words, what the current data is, and I want to provide a sample of what I want that data to look like. So we are essentially training this little data set, if you will, with some values. So those are the first input. That's what currently exists within the data set, and that's how I want it to look. So we can go through and we can continue to do this. So I'm going to type in this value here. There we go. And then from my output, I'm going to go ahead and select that value. And then from here, I will select and then down in my third output, I'm going to select this value. So I'm standardizing these values, but because it's not necessarily as machine intuitive right away to use an existing function, I can actually use this magic fill to train it, how that will look. So I've submitted, I'm going to go ahead and submit that now, and that will create those values within my data set for me within that address column. So you can see now that I'm standardizing the output for that, so it's all in the same structure. So that is the creation of that particular preparation. And so now we can export this if we want to keep a local copy of this if we want to, but we can also work that into our normal jobs, if you will, as well. So if we come back over and we've taken this output and we've populated that, I can come back over to data inventory and see what that looks like from a trust score perspective. So within data inventory, I have this same type of data set. It's actually, this is the data set here that we've created. And if I go ahead and I select on it, you'll see that that trust score has been improved significantly. It's a favorite of mine. It's pending validation or certification. So I've sent that off for certification. And currently there is one rating on that. So that trust score will increase as more people use it, as I share that value, as more people rate that it's a highly rated value for that particular trust score, and that value up here will continue to rise. You can see that the number of invalid values has dropped significantly from its original value, and our amount of valid values has gone up as well. So we have certainly increased, by using data preparation within here, we have certainly increased the trust of this particular data set. And certifying this data set, once that passes, will further enhance and increase that trust score as well. So throughout this demo, we showed that we were able to bring data together from a variety of different data sources. Certainly the Shopify data coming in from Snowflake, as well as this legacy CRM data coming from our API, our REST API. That first step was to be able to integrate and show that connection through data inventory to get an initial view of that data, that initial score of that data, to understand if it was trustworthy, how we could use it, etc. We were then able to very quickly and easily build a pipeline using Pipeline Designer to make those changes into an operational flow. So by being able to enact masking, by being able to enact changes on that data that we knew needed to be made, we were able to make that data very quickly and very easily more operational. And then finally, we were also able to empower the non-data engineer by being able to interact with that data. The operations folks, the data analysts, the business analysts were able to use a tool like data preparation to be able to provide feedback on the shape and the behavior of that data so that it could also be incorporated into further operational workloads. Once that's done, we saw how those changes, somebody who was close to the business, they were able to make those changes and then enable to see how those changes positively affected the trust score of that data. So that as the people that are close to the data and close to using that data are able to interact with it, they are able to increase the trust score provided by data inventory of the overall data that we provided. All right, Mike, back to you.
Thanks for that demonstration, Cameron. That was a great overview of how the tools can be used to solve many of the collaborative data needs that organizations need today. In summary, Talend provides a unified platform for self-service, for ease of use, and a cloud-driven environment. For self-service, it's really about making sure that there's no expertise needed in order to use the tools. They should be very easy to use. Users should be very self-sufficient with built-in learning of how to use it with always-on assistance. From an ease of use perspective, that UI needs to be appropriate for the different users. It needs to be collaborative across users and allow them to share the data flow and make data a team sport. And provide that automated scoring so that they can very quickly understand the quality of the data and where that data is used. And lastly, it all needs to be cloud-driven. It needs to be cloud-driven so that you can have very easy deployment, instant access to these tools without having to wait for somebody to install something, without having to wait for somebody to add more capacity so that you can add more users. And it needs to be able to automatically update with new features and any bug fixes that might happen along the way, so that you don't have to wait for the new install. So never will you have the wait for the next version. So reveal the intelligence in your data. To do that, get that ready to run integration platform as a service that Talend Cloud provides. It's delivered as a data fabric, meaning that all of those applications work in one seamless platform as a team sport. And you can try it now. So go to info.talend.com/request-talendcloud and get started today on improving the trust in your data. Thank you.